I'm Marilyn Priel. We all had to learn the United States Constitution in order to graduate from school. Most of us admit we memorized it, but didn't absorb much at the time, mainly because some things didn't make sense to young and inexperienced ears. Well, we have with us a lecturer and retired teacher of American history and the Constitution. He will give us some reasons for the way our Constitution is written and help us understand it better.
Welcome to The Better Part, a program that encompasses a diverse spectrum of topics important to our community, which we hope will both inform and entertain you. We invite you to sit back and enjoy the program.
Our guest taught American history and the United States Constitution for 38 years, 33 of them at Monte Vista High School in Cupertino. Retired now, he gives lectures explaining the Constitution. We're very fortunate to have him here for a really interesting program. I'd like to introduce Renio Di BOno.
Glad to be here.
To begin with, I want to read something to you. It's a statement. It says, "It is ironic that the Constitution Americans venerate so deeply is based upon a political theory which is the antithesis to democracy." What is the meaning of that statement?
Well, democracy can be a very dangerous form of government. And in the 18th century, it was largely untried. This is a time of monarchy. Mm-hmm. There's only one opinion in a monarchy. So the founding fathers of this country were fearful of the excesses of democracy. And they witnessed that just after the American Revolution. Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts was bloody. The government of Massachusetts tried to impose new taxes to pay for the American Revolution. Well, there was a shortage of money. There always was a shortage of currency. So the settlers, the people in western Massachusetts mostly, were really hard-pressed to pay. And so they rebelled against the governing authorities in Boston. And the rest of the colonies could only watch. Now, there was a government in place called the Articles of Confederation. The government had no authority to intercede across state lines, none. The government had no authority to tax. The government had no authority to use the militia or any army. There was no army.
Wasn't the Articles of Confederation, it gave more rights to individual states?
Yes, America was born as 13 colonies and never experienced a centralized power. England was far away. And contrary to the beliefs of many people, there were no taxes imposed directly on the American people. The Stamp Act was never collected. The American people, the colonists, were free. They paid for their own upkeep. And the famous principle was taxation, representation. You can't tax me unless I vote. Well, the British claimed that they did vote. The British view of representation is based on their principle of virtual representation. Parliament represents the entire British Empire, no matter where. The American view is based on an idea called actual representation, where the representation is legal only from the section of the country you live in. So a town meeting makes it legal, not imposed from above. Still, a very powerful doctrine in American history and politics today. So there was no governing authority. There was chaos in Massachusetts. The Articles of Confederation could not deal with it. So, who are the founding fathers? What did they do? These are the conservatives who believed that we should reform this first.
Reform the Articles of
Yes.
Confederation.
Yeah. So they had a meeting in Annapolis, Maryland, and then later they decided that they would throw it out. So they would go to Philadelphia, and for 2 years, in secrecy, no notes, only Madison took notes, they would come up with a new idea to give a central government energy, because they had none.
Mm-hmm.
So the Founding Fathers were interested in centralizing the authority. But we just fought a revolution against England, and this was a fearful thing. The Founding Fathers believed that democracy was dangerous. And, you know, can you remember any time in history where you've seen the excesses of democracy?
Mm-hmm.
The French Revolution,
Mm-hmm.
Shays' Rebellion. In the world today, you see mobs.
Mm-hmm.
That's democracy. It could be very dangerous.
Mm-hmm. So not everyone was in favor of having a centralized government.
No, absolutely not. The liberals, and interesting, like Thomas Jefferson, believed in states' rights. Today, it's ironic that the liberals believe in strong central government and the conservatives believe in states' rights.
So it just reversed.
It's just flip-flop, right, for different reasons.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Founding Fathers. Who were they?
Okay.
Because you always see it written with capital letters.
It is Alexander Hamilton, who's on the $10 bill. James Madison, John Jay, George Washington, not Thomas Jefferson. He was an ambassador to France, and he suspected something, and he was suspicious of it. So he was not a member of the founding delegation. These were the conservatives. They were lawyers. They were rich and powerful, and they feared for their property rights. Now, I have to explain the political philosophy. It is most argued in James Madison's Federalist Papers, number 10.
Okay, what were the Federalist Papers? Give us a little review on that.
They were propaganda, 87 propaganda documents written in a book form by 3 men who were called Publius, but they were mostly Hamilton and Madison. And they were written under an anonymous name because of duels. I mean, this really, if you said something openly, you could be challenged to a duel. Like, you know, Hamilton was killed in a duel. So they had a disguised name, Camillus, Publius. And so Madison wrote this unbelievably beautiful document, hard to read, so hard. It's called Federalist Papers number 10. And in there, he talks about the excesses of democracy. Faction, not fraction, faction. A faction could be a number of one person, 2, or thousands. A faction is irrational. It has no mind, only appetite. Me first. I want mine first. So, in democracy, who makes the rules? The majority, right? Mm-hmm. The majority, isn't that democracy? The majority rules. Will the majority rule for all the people?
What's majority tyranny then?
That's what majority tyranny is. Mm-hmm. So the Founding Fathers would give you case after case of the failure of a democratic society because of the majority. Now, there's 2 of the most dangerous factions, the factions of the few and the many. The few are the rich, the well-entrenched, the super talented, those that inherited money and have power and influence. They hire militia. They make their tax structure easier on themselves. That's the few. But this is not a democracy if they run things, is it? They are the few. They have power. Who are the many? Madison said the many are those that have nothing.
What's meant by the problem in democracy known as the few versus the many?
Okay, this is the problem of majority tyranny. There's also minority tyranny, but majority tyranny is what we're talking about here. Faction means a division of people based on their appetite, their opinion. Can you impose the same opinion on every majority? No, it's impossible. I mean, have everyone in this whole country have the same opinion. You can't do that. So we will have a majority formed with a common opinion. And we know it will be different from others. There may be a minority of one. Doesn't matter. Still a minority. So can you somehow not allow the majority to run the country? No, you can't do that. But you could put obstacles in their way that make it hard to dominate the entire political process. I just give you an example of the Founding Fathers. The Electoral College. The election of 2000, Al Gore and George W. Bush, the majority went to Gore, but he wasn't the president. That's an example of blocking the majority. And that's what they wanted to do.
But that's still difficult for me to understand, because I've always thought, you know, the popular vote, everybody gets to say on who's their president. Why do, you know, the electoral votes make the difference?
Minority? There are, I don't know how many states, 20, 30, 10, 15 states that have 2 senators and have more power than a state like California. And that is an example of the idea of blocking the majority. You cannot eliminate the majority. That's unreal. You can't do that. You cannot make them separate their opinions and think about others. No. You can only put hurdles, obstacles in their path so that they cannot control the whole government. And I would talk about that under the 4 principles of the Constitution, but I want to make sure that you understand what faction means. So Madison believed that man is evil. Man has appetite. Because Madison wisely believed that the remedy to this is a middle-class society. If we don't have the few with all the money and the many with nothing, but we have a middle-class society, then people have ambition and hope to rise up. And America, he said, could offer that because it's a big country. The larger the republic, the more effective mitigation of majority tyranny is.
So then having a more centralized government can control that to some extent then?
Yes, but it's limited. Okay, why do we have a constitution? The first reason is to prevent invasion. If we are disunited, 13 states, we're going to get killed. The French are going to take off this, they're going to take off that. We're going to be broken up easily. But if we have unity in the center, the president is the commander-in-chief, no one else. Did you know that? That's why. You can't have that divided. So he could protect the country against foreign invasion. That's the first reason for the Constitution. And it's worked. The second reason is that the president has commander-in-chief power to prevent domestic turmoil. So when there's a riot in Los Angeles and the state National Guard is ineffective, you bring in the 82nd Airborne Division. So that is a second reason for the Constitution. That's why the president has this tremendous power, but only for 4 years. So centralized government can bring about those 2 things. But there's a third reason. And this is the one that few Americans really understand. The majority operates in local government in a wicked way. So if you live in Mississippi in 1940s and you're black, you could be lynched wearing an American GI uniform. Who do you go to for redress of grievances? Who does your family turn to? The sheriff's not going to help you. He was elected by the majority. The courts, majority. You've seen To Kill a Mockingbird. Majority tyranny in this country exists on the state level. the most oppressive was never the national government, states and towns. So here's why they wrote the Constitution. It's to allow this large, extensive republic to intercede and protect the rights of the minority in those states.
Beautiful.
Well, let me mention the 4 principles of the Constitution, because I'm talking about them. Okay, there's federalism, 50 states in one, where each state has power, but they don't have the power of the militia. You'd have Julius Caesar in. You imagine Alabama with the atomic bomb.
I don't want
You
to.
imagine Texas versus California in a war. See, we look at Europe, we see that. So we have a federal republic where we take away that power. But each state has rights to make marriage laws, education, prison laws, driving laws, whatever. They have those powers. But they don't have powers to make foreign treaties. See how wise they were? The Founding Fathers understood the danger of majority tyranny, but also understood the danger of minority tyranny. That's principle number 1, federalism. Principle number 2 is called separation of powers. There's the president, elected for 4 years. There's the Senate, elected for 6 years. Why the difference? Then there's the House of Representatives, elected for 2 years. So let's say that the majority feels something and really mean, really a mean passion, really mean. And they elect a whole wave of congressmen across the country. Can they elect every congressman from every state? No, they cannot, because each state is different, federalism. But even though a great number come to control Congress and to pass discriminatory laws that are not constitutional, it has to go through the Senate. The Senate is elected for 6 years, and they have the freedom to say no because they're not getting reelected. You imagine if you are from Montana or one of those a Republican state, and the people there adamantly oppose raising taxes, and they elect you to go to Washington as a congressman, and you say in a speech, I think we should raise taxes. You know what's going to happen to you when you go home? They have primaries, and you'll have challengers from all over the state. You will lose. So that representative must toe the line of his state. And it could be on guns, it could be on marriage, anything that has to do with Congress. Taxes is a big one. So when he comes to Congress and he has this really passionate feeling and he wants to make it a law, he's got to deal with the other congressmen from all the 50 states who don't care about that. So he's forced to do something which Ben Franklin called our greatest principles. He said there are 3 principles of the Constitution, and they are compromise, compromise, compromise. And that's the secret of success. If you don't make a deal, you will have civil war.
Is that what's called like the political theory of the Constitution?
Yeah, it's based, the Founding Fathers were realists. They were not naive lovers of democracy. They were conservative. They believed that man was evil and must be checked. So if you put a man into the White House, the presidency, can't he become evil if he's there for 50 years? We all know that. History proves that. Study the Roman Empire.
What are the historical roots of the Constitution?
Well, they go back to the experience of colonial America. 13 states, each one having their own preferences. For instance, if you lived in Massachusetts, early on, you abolished slavery. That was what you wanted, state right. If you lived in Alabama, you preserved slavery. So the Constitution goes back to that. You can't erase that. That is a basic idea of the country, individual states' rights. And again, the only experience they had with centralism was with the king, which they didn't like. So today, you will see Americans speak fearfully of an encroachment by the federal government. And they're always afraid of that because it's just a historical tradition in America to oppose authority from the center. But it's ironic that the central government is the one that tries to preserve democracy the most, i.e. the Supreme Court. Does the majority need a Supreme Court? No. The majority doesn't need anything. Does the majority need a constitution? No. They make the rules. So if there were no constitution, and this were a national government with no states, just think, who would make all the rules? Who's the majority?
You mentioned the four basic structures of the Constitution. You mentioned federalism and separation of powers, and then
checks and balances.
Checks and balances, right. Which you just kind of covered.
Well, yeah, it's a little different though. Checks and balances is really tricky. They have all kinds of refined obstacles. The president has a veto, very powerful. Roosevelt used it. Andrew Jackson vetoed so many laws. It's a tremendous power. But when the president makes an appointment, it must be confirmed by the Senate. If he does a treaty, it's got to be signed and ratified by the U.S. Senate. You ever read about Woodrow Wilson and the Treaty of Versailles? How the Senate refused to ratify that? It killed him. He had a stroke. So there's checks and balances. If a congressman commits a crime, can he be arrested by a federal marshal in Congress? No. If the crime is done in the state, only the state can do that. But he can always go back to Washington. He has independent jurisdiction from his locale. There's no way to check that. The only way is to have him reelected or defeated in election. So Congress has its powers. So being that the public pays the taxes, mostly, then who should have the power over originating tax laws? The people. Why not let the Senate do that? Because they don't represent the people. They represent the state, and it's easy for them they have more leeway to do things in the Senate because they're only elected once every 6 years. And they don't have to go to each locale and just beg. See, if you're a congressman from Morgan Hill or Gilroy, when you come home, you have to talk to the wine growers there or the farmers. But if you're a congressman from San Francisco, you have different groups. You can play them off. But if you're a senator from California, you have all kinds of different groups. You can play them off and still get elected. That's an advantage of being a senator. So you're really smooth operator. You can do that. And you'll notice that there's no term limits in the Senate. Those guys are there forever, 50 years or something. Bird, yeah. See, they have unbelievable power. They have the power to not veto, but to filibuster. Oh my God. And 60 votes to pass a law? That's called minority tyranny. But the Founding Fathers put that in there to make us compromise. And we have done it, except for the Civil War.
Just to kind of finish this off, tell us what you would like to say about the Bill of Rights.
The Bill of Rights is the liberal contribution, the Jeffersonians. Mm-hmm. The three principles are federalism, checks and balances, separation of power. Those three things hit upon the idea of control. Control the mob, and they work. The Bill of Rights is really liberal, especially the First Amendment. Freedom of speech. God, that is really liberal. Could you imagine what that's like in North Korea? You can't say anything. Here you can write an article in a newspaper. You can go on TV like this. You can do a sign. You can burn your draft card, so on. So the Bill of Rights protects the individual. The Fifth Amendment, the 10th Amendment, the 14th Amendment is the most powerful of all our amendments. No state can deny a citizen the rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness without due process of law. passed at the end of the Civil War because of the oppression of black people. 14th Amendment is really, no other country has something like that. And if you are born here, you're a citizen here. Did you know that? You're a citizen of the United States. That's really liberal. So what can happen to this country? You can have people coming here from Mexico, let's say. 11 million immigrants. It's complicated. Children are born here, they're citizens. Parents may not be. That's very liberal. So the Bill of Rights and the amendments have always been the safeguard of individual freedoms against the majority, too, and against the minority. And we don't think about minority tyranny as much, where a few people can block things, and this country could do nothing.
Well, it's all been very interesting and
Thank
really
you.
very informative, and you explained things that I had forgotten when I learned it in 8th grade.
Yeah, I get excited. I get excited. Thank
That's
you very much.
great.